So welcome back. This lesson, again, we're going to work with adding and subtracting positive and negative numbers. We're going to have quite a few more examples this time. Now, one of the things we'll bring to attention is addition is commutative. So as we talked earlier, it's a good idea to think in terms of addition when it comes to working with numbers. Again, commutative just kind of means you can add in any order that you like. So when it comes to this problem right here, don't forget we also mentioned debt versus income, where debt is associated with the negative number, income is associated with the positive number. So when I look at this problem, you could say 11 minus 3 plus 5, but what I also want you to think of this as is 11 and a negative 3 and a 5. So if I look at this as three terms, I can also look at it in this fashion, which allows me to kind of move around. I could add 11 plus 5 and get 16, and then 16 plus the negative 3, that means you have $16 of income, but when you add debt just takes away from your income, and I end up within 13 as my result there. Yes, you could say 11 minus 3 is 8, 8 plus 5 is 13, but I also want you to kind of see it this way. So when it comes to a problem like this, what I should see is 9 and the opposite of negative 3 and a negative 5. So if I look at it in those terms, change this to an addition problem, I have 9 and the opposite of negative 3 is the same thing as a positive 3, and we have a negative 5. So I could say 9 plus 3 is 12, 12 and a negative 5. So when you have a 12 and a negative 5, $12 of income, and you combine that with $5 debt, that debt removes from your income, and therefore we're down to, I believe that would be 7. So it'd be a positive 7 since there's more income. Next problem is an example of positive and negative numbers, but we're working with decimals. Remember, when you work with addition of decimals, you just basically line up the numbers by the decimal, and you kind of go from there. So again, when I look at this, instead of saying 1 take away a negative 2.5, I could say 1.7 and a negative 2.5, the opposite of negative 2.5. So I could say 1.7 plus, and the opposite of negative 2.5 is the same thing as 2.5. So I can actually rewrite that problem in that fashion. So then when I add these together, you have 2.5 plus 1.7. And remember, when you add decimals, you just line up the decimal and just add it like you work with whole numbers. And just bring that decimal straight down, and we should have 4.2 as a result there. So our next example we'll look at is some fractional numbers. Now when you add fractions, remember the key is to have a common denominator. Notice also, I always like to just put my negative on the top. That's just kind of a common practice. So in doing this, I have a 2 and an 8. I'm trying to find a common denominator. If I play this out here, that's 2, 4, 6, 8. I can kind of see that 8 is actually a common multiple between the two. And so therefore, that 8 is going to be my least common denominator. So I'm going to change my denominators to 8s. And then if we have, multiply this 2 by, it looked like it took 1, 2, 3, 4 2s to make an 8. But remember to keep it in an equivalent fraction. If you multiply that bottom by 4, I must also multiply that numerator by 4 as well. So it's going to change this to negative 12/8. And then I'm going to add to that 5/8. So I've got my LCD. The other thing you do is just really, all you got to do to add fractions is add the numerators. So if I have a negative 12 plus 5, that's going to end up being then 7/8. Don't forget your answer's always got to be in lowest terms when you work with fractions. Also got to look at this and recognize that it's more negative than positive. So that answer is actually going to be a negative 7/8. You have more debt than income. So the income is going to remove some of your debt, but you're still going to have debt left over. So if we look at this problem, I have 9/5 take away a negative 3/4. So we're learning that when I see this negative and negative, that just implies, just changes to an addition problem. So that's 9/5 plus then 3/4. So we see that basically just means add and make that the opposite of 3/4, which is 3/4. So then we got to recognize we're going to have a common denominator. So between a 5 and a 4, a lot of times when we work with common denominators, especially when they're unfamiliar, you should be able to find that common denominator within the first 5. If you don't, just multiply those two numbers together, and that will always give you a common denominator. So if I go 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. I did have a common multiple of 20, so that's going to be my new denominator. So I'm going to change these denominators to 20s. But I also got to pay attention that to change that 5 to a 20, I have to multiply by 4. So when I multiply this by 4, I got to multiply this by 4, which changes this to 36 20ths. Then I got to multiply this by 5 and this by 5, which is going to give me then 15 20ths. And then when you add fractions, you just add the numerators only. Is that going to be, I believe that's going to be 51. So 51 over 20. I don't see that reducing, so we can just leave that as what we call an improper fraction. An improper fraction is a fraction that's more than 1, and that's perfectly okay in algebra to leave this as an improper fraction. We don't have to change that to a decimal or a mixed number. So that concludes, I believe this is lesson number 5.